So we were founded in 2006, been around a long time. Our mission is changing work life, to change work life, yours in particular. We do that by way of technology implementation, which I assume is why you're all here today, training, best practice training, the full ITIL suite, cybersecurity, data governance, etc. And then of course, advisory and consulting. We are a ServiceNow elite partner. And our name, everybody always asks where our name came from. So I thought I'd share a little something here. There was a Gartner study that said mission critical downtime is caused by 20% of the time software and hardware issues, 80% of the time people and process issues. So we like to say we go beyond that 20%. Yes, of course we do software and hardware, but we work on the people and process side as well. And we're very proud of that. So thank you all for being here with us today. We will be recording the session and we'll get you a copy later today or tomorrow, I'll say. So with that, Ryan, please take it away.
Thank you, Lindsay. So good morning, good afternoon, good morning if you are on the West Coast like me. My name is Ryan Dinwiddie. I am the Chief Solution Architect here at Beyond 20. I'm also a ServiceNow Certified Master Architect. So I spent the last 10 years specifically working with ServiceNow. A very long time ago, I started out in a client role, moved into a consulting role. HR has always been a passion of mine. As a side note, HR always has the best stories when it comes to workshops and meetings. But in my past, I've worked with some very large HR organizations and helped them migrate onto ServiceNow and kind of transform how they change and the services they offer.
Thanks, Ryan. Hello, everyone. My name is Rebekah Onomiwori. I'm a ServiceNow consultant with Beyond 20. I've been working on the ServiceNow platform for a little over 4 years, and a lot of that time has been focused on human resources or the HRSD application, whether that be helping organizations migrate their HR services into ServiceNow for the first time, or if they already use ServiceNow for HR, then helping them take full advantage of what's already offered. Prior to working with ServiceNow, I did work for about 4 years in benefits administration on that side of HR. And I think that background has really helped me to appreciate the value of what ServiceNow brings to the HR space. And I think that's it for introduction. So Ryan, I think you're good to kick us off.
Thank you, Rebekah. It's kind of a great note too that Rebekah and I've worked on HR projects together in the past, and having her experience has actually been as an HR practitioner has been incredibly beneficial on projects. So I'm really looking forward to some of that additional benefit today. Okay, so let's talk about what we're here for today. So when we're talking about migrating to something like ServiceNow HR Service Delivery, we're going to talk through kind of starting where you are. So that's always a good practice and good principle. And we're also going to want to dive in and understand exactly what human resources service delivery looks like in ServiceNow. So that's kind of an important aspect of this is education piece as well. And then kind of where the rubber meets the road section as far as how do you get from where you are to where you maybe want to be with ServiceNow. And along those lines too, we're going to talk about some quick wins that are kind of as a result of that migration. Along the way too, we want to talk about employee experience because HR is always so very focused on employee experience. And then the final question is, how do we know that we are successful? That's always just going to be the big question is we get to the end of a project, what's it look like?
Yeah, and Ryan, I know that we were going to be looking at a number of topics. You just listed off several, but I think there's a couple of themes or goals that we're going to be seeing throughout these topics. So I just want to kind of be looking for those. And one of those themes is simplifying and improving the employee service experience. So we're going to see that throughout as we're going through this deck today. And another one is to empower HR agents and managers to work efficiently and strategically. So I think it's going to be interesting just to see how those goals are accomplished and how we're going to see them kind of themed throughout this deck.
Excellent. So if you've been on our webinars before, you've probably seen this slide and you may have seen it from ServiceNow. And if you're new to ServiceNow, I'll talk through this, but I am, as obviously stated, a huge fan of ServiceNow, but it really does have incredible capabilities, and it has been dubbed the platform of platforms. And the idea behind that being that we are kind of starting at the top. Let me get my little laser pointer out here, but really we're starting at the top and we're meeting employees where they are. So that's a really big theme over the last couple of years, especially in this kind of like post-COVID world where we've still got employees that are not all returning to the office. Some may be needing HR services, from their phone, maybe they're stuck in traffic, hopefully not while driving. maybe they're on their living room couch. It just kind of depends on where they are. But the goal is to provide the same level of service to those employees, regardless of where they are. Especially when sometimes when we have HR asks or requests, those may be coming in at a very stressful time in that employee's life, and we want to make sure that we're able to answer that ask quickly and effectively. And when we talk about ServiceNow, some things that come to mind for a lot of people is IT workflows, that kind of like incident process, but it's way more than just the incident process. We have our additional employee workflows. There's also like customer workflows if we've got external customers that we're serving. But the whole idea being that everything that our organization needs to do is on the same platform. So we've got one platform, one data model. And really, and a big important note of this too is ServiceNow is coming in to be that engagement layer in your organization. It's not coming in to replace, it's not designed or intended to replace systems of record for some applications. A good example of that on the HR side is human capital management tools. There's a lot of capabilities and functionality in those HCM tools that doesn't exist in ServiceNow. So the whole goal is to aggregate that user experience. So we've got one place for our end users to go and to be able to communicate, get case status, and all of those kinds of areas within human resources service delivery.
Yeah, when I see this slide, Ryan, it looks very busy. There's a lot going on here. But I think that we can already see that focus of just simplifying HR service delivery for everyone involved, because even though there's a lot of pieces happening here, the process is being simplified. And I think we've all felt that pain of, trying to find an answer for something that we really need when there's just not a good process in place for it. If I can just give a quick example, it does make me think of some of the times working in benefits admin, where I've seen so many situations where employees are, they're physically at the doctor's office and maybe being told that their out-of-pocket cost is higher than they thought, or even that they don't even have coverage at all. And it's just really stressful. They don't know who to talk to. They don't know how to fix it. And a lot of times, even if they get a hold of HR, the HR agents aren't sure of the correct process or how to coordinate with the insurance provider to get the answers. And it's just a really frustrating experience for everyone involved, for the employee and for the HR agents. And it really should be easy for employees just to get the services that they need. And for HR agents, they should have the tools that they need to manage their work. So I love that so much of the focus here is just to provide easy access to information and to simplify that process for everyone involved.
Excellent. So with that in mind, let's talk about a really good practice for service management. Start from where you are. So I always enjoy the adage of, if you don't know where you are, it's hard to plot a course to where you want to go. There's a reason maps exist. So keeping that in mind, let's talk about maybe some examples on where your organization may be.
Yes, I think a good place to start is with shared mailboxes, because this is a really common one. A lot of organizations use email as the primary means of delegating and managing their day-to-day work. I think we've all been there, where email was the driver of what we need to do that day and what needs to be done. And those shared mailboxes are used to route work to agents who have the skills to complete the work. So there really is a lot of strategy behind setting those up and just kind of organizing the types of requests that come in. And if that's what you're using, we want to dig into that. There are going to be a lot of business processes that already exist within that mailbox system that you're using, and that's what we want to define. So we want to think about how those mailboxes are being used. What mailboxes do you already have set up, and who are the members for that? Because that's going to help you categorize the types of requests that are coming in, and even define user groups and skill groups that are needed to work those requests. You want to think about who monitors to ensure that requests are responded to timely. Do you have a good management system in place? Do you have any SLAs? Or maybe you want to incorporate SLAs, but it's really just too difficult to track or enforce when your work is driven by emails. Again, what types of requests are coming in via email, because that can really help you categorize the requests that you get. And are you getting a lot of requests that really don't need to come in at all? Could they be prevented altogether if the employee just had easy access to find that information on a portal somewhere? Because this can help you define the type of knowledge articles that you might need to create to prevent some of these requests in the first place. And ask yourself what you wish could be easier. What are things that you wish you could do, but just haven't been realistic because your work has been driven by emails. So if you are using shared mailboxes, these are the kinds of questions that you just want to ask yourself to help define your business processes as they exist today and the users that are involved.
Rebecca? So another place that you could be starting from is maybe a legacy application. So if you've got a legacy application that maybe is running your HR case management processes, maybe you've reached kind of the edge of that platform or reached the limitations of it, or maybe you're missing a key capability like reporting or integrations, or maybe you're just looking for a more modern web application with a modern interface. But very much to Rebecca's point, when we have this start from where you are, a lot of this is just kind of going to be an inventory of, what are your case processes, what kinds of cases you answer, where do they come from, and kind of start to document those processes. One of the biggest questions with starting from a legacy application is, what do we do with that old data? So what about, we're going to talk about data a little bit later on, but what about in process cases? What about things that are in a legal hold? Like those are potentially large and potentially impactful questions to ask and start to think through when you're getting ready to do that migration.
Yeah, and another common one, Ryan, is going to be the spreadsheets. Another thing that I think that we all use to manage and organize data to one degree or another. Spreadsheets really are a simple way to track and assign work. They can be used to create reports or simply just to store data, and they are used for that a lot. So if you already have spreadsheets that are commonly used, they're a really good place to start evaluating just to kind of prep for this migration process. So you want to look at those existing spreadsheets. Think about what data is important to your organization and who needs access to it. Is there data that's reported on and sent to management? Do you have people who are manually creating these spreadsheets? And if they are, where are they getting that data from? So, all that data that is in that spreadsheet, it's important. So we want to kind of find out where the type of work is being tracked. Spreadsheets, they can be really challenging to manage and to keep up to date, but they are probably foundational to a lot of your processes, and they store a lot of the key data that you need. So it's really important that you evaluate these as you prepare to migrate all of this information into ServiceNow.
And to that point, I think one of the final places that we see people starting from is maybe there's no tracking system at all. Maybe it's a paper-based system. Maybe there's a desk full of sticky notes, which if you would see my desk is also full of sticky notes. So it's important to think about like, that's okay. And you're going to start from where you are because that's what's right for your organization. There's no right or wrong answer here on where you're starting from because it depends and varies wildly between the organizations. But now with something like ServiceNow, you can go as big as you can dream. So you can start thinking about what would you like to start doing as an HR organization, very much like Rebekah had pointed out, and what data are you being asked for, and what risks are there in your organization for having no tracking system or spreadsheets or shared mailboxes? Like, is there a legal exposure risk there? Is the customer service the best you could be providing for your employees? Those are just important things to think about. So now that we kind of have a start from where you are, let's talk about what maybe that employee experience would look like on something like ServiceNow. So I've got my ServiceNow box here, and then I've got my kind of system of records box on the far right there. But let's start with an employee, and that employee has an ask, and that ask could be anything like, I have a question about my most recent paycheck, or I need to add a beneficiary, or I need to adjust my withholdings, or I need to file a grievance against my supervisor. Whatever those kind of asks are, again, all those communication channels, whether it's cell phone, mobile, laptop, virtual agent conversation, which is going to be a chat bot, which we're going to talk about a little later on. I'm picking up the phone, physically calling, I'm walking in and seeing somebody. All of those asks are going to be funneled through ServiceNow. And as we're funneling through, we're going to have a way to identify and classify that ask. And as we're classifying that ask, that allows us to route to the agent correctly, or the correct agent in the correct place. And that agent is able to then transact in the correct system. Again, whether it's a payroll question, whether it is like a workforce question, whether it's a talent question, we can get to the right agent at the right time through services. And Rebekah's going to talk about services a little bit later on today. But from there, we also have the ability to allow the employees to be guided to the right system. So just because an employee has a payroll question doesn't mean they necessarily need to know where the payroll tool is or what it is. or even necessarily have a login. So we're really looking at using ServiceNow as that engagement layer to make sure that we are, and this may not quite come off correctly, but shield employees, right, from all the massive tools that exist within the environments, but we're giving the employees one place to focus their time and attention. But maybe in our example of adding a beneficiary, those transactions can happen within something like ServiceNow. And as we're having those transactions, we can have those integrations to sync data between the systems. So maybe I need to update my beneficiary information. I can do that within a form on the portal within ServiceNow. Maybe it goes to an agent to review, or it doesn't even need to go to an agent at all, and it can just be sent over to whatever our HCM is to allow that transaction to continue.
Oh, Ryan, if I could just jump in here too. When I see this slide, I again see that same theme of just simplifying that employee experience. And what really I'm seeing here is, like you said, that the employee is protected, or they're shielded from needing to deal with all of the multiple HRS systems that might be involved in their request. They may or may not know what those systems would even need to be, and they shouldn't have to know what all those systems would need to be to really resolve the request. So it's just great that they have a single place to submit the request, and they can come back to that same place to check their status and interact with the HR agent who's helping them. So it just creates a really positive experience for the employee side of the interaction.
I agree.
All right, and we are jumping into understanding human resource service delivery. So we're going to start to understand just kind of how that works within ServiceNow, and look at how the application is structured and how the HRSD licensing is set up for ServiceNow. So just as a quick intro, HRSD gives an organization the ability to deliver a really exceptional employee service experience while also improving the efficiency and security of HRSD. It is a scoped app within ServiceNow. Some of the components that are installed with that app are HR-specific roles, data policies, and scripts. I just want to call out that that is not an inclusive list of all the components, but just to highlight a few, and to call out that they help to control the functionality, and they provide that additional level of security to the application and the data. And anyone who has worked in HR understands the importance of that security when dealing with some of the sensitive data that is stored within HR. It is a native application, and it uses a Center of Excellence, or COE model. And that just means that there are defined tables in which a case is captured, and it really helps to align those cases with a specific work group, and then keep any permissions and access or security tied up with that. Some examples of a COE table are payroll, workforce admin, total rewards is one. And then those tables are going to help categorize the type of services, such as payroll discrepancy or medical enrollment. So it all, works together in that categorization. That is really just a very basic intro into the structure of HRSD. And next, we're going to just take a look at the different licensing models that are offered. And the first one that we're looking at is the HRSD professional license. The HR case management and knowledge management make up the primary set of applications that's included in HRSD Professional. At a really high level, it allows for employees to have just self-service. So employees can request services that result in an HR case. They can also find knowledge articles to answer their questions. So it really just empowers them to get what they need, find the answers that they need, submit the requests that they need. And these are activities that ultimately deflect common HR questions and give HR agents more time to focus on some of their more strategic activities. Employee Center Pro is another really great feature here within HRSD Pro. This Employee Center is a single portal where employees can engage with HR. They can submit their HR requests. They can find answers, just like we kind of talked about, using the HR knowledge base, and they can even access and sometimes update their employee profile, depending on just what they have access to and what fields they're allowed to change. It is also multi-departmental, so employees are not limited to just HR-related actions, which is really nice. That just like the one-stop shop that we were talking about, when they come to this portal, it's not just HR requests that they're submitting. They can also come to the portal and report an incident that has occurred that's completely unrelated to HR, or they can come in and request items from the service catalog. So it's kind of works across departments in that way. And there are also additional store integrations that are available, so you can provide even more features if needed, in addition to what we've talked about. And within HRSD Pro, you're going to get a dedicated role-based experience to better support your people leaders. And an example of that would be the Manager's Hub. So that's a portion of the portal that is just accessible and available to managers. And it helps increase their self-service and proactive engagement with their team. It's a place that provides insights and recommended actions from what's most urgent and important to drive team success. And it enables managers to grow as leaders through curated and personalized resources. So it's really nice that depending on your role and depending on your access, you can do a lot of different things within that portal, and it's still that single point of reference for you to go to. So there are a lot of really great features in HRSD Pro that we just ran through really quickly, but there's even more with HRSD Enterprise that Ryan's going to talk through.
Thanks, Rebekah. So HRSD Enterprise, we're going to dive in the next slide just a little bit more in detail, the difference between the two of them. But when we talk about capability-wise, one of the big adds to HRSD Enterprise is what ServiceNow calls lifecycle events. So this is a really powerful workflow engine for you to be able to kind of like build and potentially automate very complex HR workflows. Good examples of that would be like onboarding, offboarding, transfers. Especially when you think about something like onboarding, that is a massive, massive process. So massive that about a year and a half ago, I spent almost an entire year with an East Coast hospital system completely just doing onboarding. That was the entire, like content of the project was just building out onboarding within ServiceNow. And that's one of the nice things about being single platform again, and very much like Rebekah had mentioned with Employee Center Pro being multi-department, onboarding is too. Onboarding is never just a singular HR activity. There's HR, there's facilities, there's IT, there's access management. There's all sorts of things involved in that onboarding process. We kind of continue that system of like engagement as well with the HR journeys. So we can workflow out in HRSD Enterprise journeys for our employees. So we can have connections into learning management or LMS tools to be able to take our employees and kind of shepherd them through their promotion paths, through maybe learning additional skills, moving into different departments, kind of taking that time and putting that energy back into our employees, and then helping grow our employees, expand their skills, and making them more valuable and more capable. Okay, so let's talk about what is included. So I've got kind of my core bubble down here at the bottom. So when we talk about the 2 licensing levels within ServiceNow, regardless of those licensing levels, I'm going to have access to core things across the platform. And these are the same core things that I have access to if I'm in IT, if I'm in facilities, any of those sorts of other areas. But I have access to mobile, so native mobile capabilities, if I can speak correctly. We're going to talk about those a little bit later on, but dashboards and reports and performance analytics are very powerful out-of-the-box reporting applications I have access to. Knowledge management for both employees and agents, and then the case management as well as universal request. And we'll talk a little bit later about where the very hot topic of AI and machine learning comes into play, but we'll talk about that in a maturity model a little bit later on. But when we talk about professional here, with that professional, we're really starting to talk about that employee center comes in, the case and knowledge comes in. We can kind of start to streamline and standardize employees' responses or agents' responses to employees with playbooks. We can start to expand our COEs and services with a specific center of excellence around employee relations. And then we can also start to have a lot of like pre-built integrations from ServiceNow and others for that kind of employee service management.
And then moving into enterprise. This is where we are really going to start stewarding our employees and helping them to utilize all that's available to them, which, as you can see, there's a lot going on this slide. We're setting them up for success with journeys and learning paths, like Ryan called out before, and we're growing that talent internally and managing that path for them. We're starting to bring in life cycles like the onboarding, offboarding that we just discussed, which can be very lengthy processes. Other life cycles like transfers, life events like a leave of absence or a new family member. It is important to call out, though, that these are entitlements. They are not requirements. So if you are not ready to implement all of these from the get-go, that is totally okay. You're not forced to define all this and get everything working, but they are all available as your organization is ready to start leveraging them. So they're great tools to have. And Ryan, one thing that I just wanted to call out here is that there are a lot of organizations who have already started off with Pro, and they're starting to see that, hey, maybe there are some things that you want to leverage in the enterprise licensing. Is it going to be a complicated process to migrate from Pro to enterprise? And what does that look like?
So that's a great question, because it's not often as a consultant I get to give a clear-cut answer. The answer to that is no, it's not going to be difficult. From a technical perspective, kind of like under the covers with ServiceNow, it's just an additional plugin that you turn on. Now, that being said, process-wise, it's a little more different. It's a little more different. But when we have that enterprise capability, so much is built on that, like professional foundations, the HR services that you're already doing. So it's just kind of important to note that, like, it's not a big lift technically, but when you think about how much that can open in the organization process-wise, it starts to get to be pretty significant, but it does have that significant capabilities to allow more access in.
Awesome. That is good news.
It absolutely is. So now that we know where we are with ServiceNow, let's talk about how we get there. So how we get there, the first step is we need to make sure that we're understanding services. Rebekah's going to dive into that in just a minute. But really, we're wanting to talk about what are the services that our HR organization offers to the employees, and how do we fulfill those services. Next step is we're really going to want to know our sources of data. So we're going to want to make sure that we know our data, because data is foundational for automation. So a lot of kind of the theme that we've seen from a lot of HR organizations is making that step into ServiceNow. And then once they've got that step into ServiceNow, really taking off and being able to kind of streamline and automate how they respond to employees, how they work cases, and how they serve their employees. From there, we want to make sure that we're identifying applications, because very much like Rebekah and I had mentioned earlier, that HRIS is a very large umbrella, and there are many applications that do many different things. Some do the same things. So along with identifying those applications, we're going to want to talk about overlap in those systems, and we're going to dive into each one of these topics individually. So this is kind of like the 30,000-foot flyover. But we're going to want to talk about overlapping of these systems, and it's really going to be, slightly more of a technical conversation. But we're going to dig in and talk about how we identify those applications, capabilities, maybe integrations and connections between those applications, and if they are needed.
All right, thanks, Ryan. So we are looking at understanding services first off here. So most of you probably have a pretty good idea of what a service is, but just to kind of walk through some of the technicalities of it. Services are the starting point for HR case creation, and they define the process for that case type, from request all the way through the fulfillment. HR services are the request and assistance an HR organization provides its employees. That might be anything from benefit enrollment, direct deposit setup, and requests for relocation services. So you can see some of those examples up there on the slide that we're looking at now. In preparation for migrating to ServiceNow, you'll want to identify what your services are, what services your organization already offers, and define the fulfillment steps that are required to complete that request. So you probably already have some kind of checklist or approval process that is aligned with each type of service. So those things need to be defined so they can be built out within each one of these types of services. Also consider which new requests you want to implement. After going through the activity that we did earlier with start where you are, you've probably identified some that you haven't been able to offer, or just haven't been able to address yet, but you would really like to offer based on some of the requests or the questions that you get in. So start defining what those new services should be and what that process is going to be to complete the fulfillment of them. Some of the examples on the screen right now might give you some ideas of what you already have, or some ideas of what you may want to implement. And it's important to note here too, that these services that you see on the screen, some of them are services that the employee is going to come in directly and just request on their own behalf. So maybe like Ryan mentioned before, there was a payroll discrepancy that they need to look into, or maybe they want to enroll in benefits and they're doing this for themselves. There are other situations where an HR agent might need to come in and request a service on behalf of an employee. So if it's a situation where there's a promotion or a job transfer or onboarding and offboarding, it's not the employee who's going to request it. It's going to be an HR agent who comes in and submits that service request, and that's going to result in a case. And then depending on the setup, the employee who's impacted may or may not be able to track the status of that. So those are all things that can be defined within the service to see who has visibility to it and who can track it. There are a couple of pretty, relevant examples on this slide. One really cool one that I also wanted to call out, though, was just that last little bubble there that you see for alumni. So there's also the option of having separate services for alumni or users who are no longer employees of the organization, or maybe they're contractors, so they don't have the same access or status as an employee, but you still want to have a separate portal for them and different services and requests that they can come in and submit within that portal. So we have that option too of setting up separate types of service requests for alumni or former employees. Again, like we've seen a few times, there is a lot going on in this slide. There is a limitless number of potential services that could be implemented. So I know it can be overwhelming in the beginning to try to define everything and get everything sorted out. So Brian, how would you approach that if it's a situation where you just feel like you've got so many services that it's hard to know where to start?
That's a really good question, Rebekah. So that's a very live question that has come up in the past. And typically we'll do just kind of like a quick little bit of analysis of what are your top asks, and maybe start with the top 10, 15, 20 asks. And typically when you kind of lay those out, I mean, they may be a little bit seasonally, but when you graph it out, you're going to see probably things shuffled into, kind of like a bell curve where we've got our spikes in the middle as far as the demands. But start with those services. The other advice that I have is services don't need to be perfect the first go around. So this is all about laying the foundation. So in this, really when it comes to services, I think perfect is going to be the enemy of good. So getting those services out, even if it's just a simple form and then getting it to the right group, that can sometimes be a monumental win. They're going to be a very iterative process as well. And services will grow and change as the organization grows and changes. So whether the organization is growing and changing organically or whether there's a merger and acquisition, it just kind of depends. But these services are never going to be static. Hopefully no one was hoping the fact that they could set them up and walk away. But that's never going to work, unfortunately. They're just gonna continue to grow and change as the organization does.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you, Ryan.
So with the services, let's talk about sources of data. And when we talk about sources of data, we're going to talk about employees. So within ServiceNow, there's really two ways to refer to employees with the HR module. So we have our user records and then we have our HR profile records. Our HR profile records are going to have some more of that more sensitive data, and that's going to be more restricted. We can move some of that employee data in. Example might be like date of birth, pay date, benefits group information, those kinds of things. And the idea behind that is we're wanting to reduce clicks for agents as well. So if we're needing agents to validate identities as things come in through maybe an IVR call system, or if employee or agents need to maybe go out to HCM to find a specific piece of data every single time, if we can eliminate having that second screen up, that's going to make the agent's life better. It's going to make them faster to solve those cases. Okay, so case data. So knowing the sources of data for case, maybe current cases or historical data. Another one that can sometimes get overlooked is maybe any vendor or third-party case data. So good examples of that be like benefits, maybe that's supported by a vendor, or maybe we have our ethics hotline that is, run by a vendor. Is that data going to need to come into ServiceNow? Is it going to need to be integrated into ServiceNow? And we talked a little bit about historical data, but that's going to be that kind of like $1 million question, not actual cost, mind you, but the $1 million question around like, do we need to bring that historical data in? What happens to cases that are currently in progress? What about litigation? Those are all sorts of things that we need to answer before we get into ServiceNow. And if you're an already existing ServiceNow customer, chances are a lot of your core data is already going to be taken care of, but HR may need some additional data. So we may need cost centers, locations, physical locations, departments, those kinds of things. And this is going to be an interesting conversation with IT if IT is already live within ServiceNow. Because when we talk about cost centers, departments, locations, those may vary a little bit from what we see on the IT side, because IT generally more cares about where things are at, and HR usually more cares about where people are at. So there's locations that may exist, like data centers that nobody actually works at, that are not necessarily important to HR.
Thanks, Ryan. That's a lot of really good information. That's a lot of data that you just talked through. Kind of have a similar question that I had on the last slide that we looked at. How are we going to prioritize this data? I mean, there's a lot. Does it all need to be imported at once? Does it all need to be accounted for at the beginning, or can that kind of be a staged approach?
Here's where I can give you the good consultant's answer. If it depends.
There
Typically, like the employee data is, in my opinion, going to be some of the most important stuff, because that's most impactful to the agents. But the it depends answer of or response to my answer is it depends on what the organizational goals are. If there isn't much historical case data, not important. If ServiceNow is already alive and we already have all that core data, not important. So employee data would be my primary to kind of answer your question.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's really helpful.
Okay. So let's talk about identifying applications. And this is a fun one, because this is one of those ones, like, I love whiteboard. So this is a great whiteboard activity, the next couple slides. But really, we want to talk about kind of what enterprise architects call your application landscape. So we want to dive in and think about what are all of the HRIS systems that we have, and what do those look like?
Yeah, and there can be so many that's hard to really start whiteboarding where they are. So this is a really good exercise where it's broken down into categories, so we can start looking at them one piece at a time. So that first piece that we're looking at is recruitment and application management. So think about how your organization manages these processes. How are you right now managing your recruitment efforts and your applicant tracking efforts? Are you already using a recruiting or applicant tracking software? There are a couple listed on the slide, but of course there are dozens of other options out there. So just think about what that use case is and what you currently have implemented for that. And then, is that application inside of your current human capital management system, such as using Workday recruiting as part of your Workday, or is it a standalone third-party app that you're using? And the next area that we're looking at is the HCM, or human capital management system. We just mentioned Workday. SAP is another big one, but you're going to want to identify whatever application it is that you're currently using for HCM. And then we've got next one coming up is systems of engagement. And you can see there's an overlap there with Workday. So when we're talking about system of engagement, we are talking about how the employees are interacting and engaging with your organization. So this could be an overlap like you see with Workday, because there is an option of that Workday portal where employees can come in to engage. Obviously, if you've got ServiceNow, that's a major one that is already available for employees to use as their engagement source. But just start thinking about what systems, it could be multiple, that employees are currently using to engage with your organization. And then finally, we've got the identity and access management. So when we're talking about this, we're talking about things like security, access, single sign-on, multi-factor authentication. So think about how those things are being managed right now. You're going to want to identify which identity management service you are currently using to handle those processes. And as you're going through this and identifying all these potential applications that you are using as part of your HRIS process, it's going to give you that big picture of your current application landscape, which is going to be important later on.
It really will. And now comes one of my favorite ones. This is the one I was going to warn was going to be a little more technical. But we've got all of our different types of applications. So kind of once we know the landscape, we can then start to see the overlap. And when we have overlap, very much like Rebekah had mentioned, are we doing ATS inside of a specific tool, or are we doing it in an HCM? And does the HCM have that capability? Do we need to have a separate ATS app, or like applicant tracking tool? Can we move that capability out into another platform? So those kind of conversations when it comes to something like this. But then when we start to have those questions around, well, recruitment typically needs to be connected to background check. That's one of those nice, easy things for the onboarding process. But then maybe we also want to connect it to an e-verify tool. And anything that's recruitment, if it's not in human capital, should be connected to human capital to allow, once offer has been accepted, allow those people to flow into HCM. But then HCM also needs to be connected to things like Active Directory to make sure that we can authenticate people. And then our HCM needs to be connected to our system of engagement. In this example, something like ServiceNow. And then ServiceNow also needs to be connected to Active Directory to authenticate and allow people in. And then when we're talking about getting new hires in or adjusting access, then we talk about identity and access management on top of that. So this kind of like whiteboarding exercise gets to be very messy very quickly, but it's a really great exercise to be able to run through all of these things and think about what data flows where, what triggers that data to flow, should the data flow, is there a need for it, and does it currently flow? So this is going to be one of those nice things in kind of like, as you're preparing to move to ServiceNow, map all of this out ahead of time so you have an idea of where your data flows are, and then maybe identify what integrations you may need to build, because this is going to help your ServiceNow and your implementation partner identify and scope correctly the sort of build that's going to need to happen to make sure that you're getting, what you need in the long term.
So Ryan, this whiteboarding exercise looks incredibly messy, but also incredibly critical. There's a lot going on there, a lot of potential connections that need to be made. So for an example, if someone needs to know how to connect ServiceNow to an HCM, how would they go about doing that?
That's a great question. And let me go back to that slide because the first answer is depending on the HCM, ServiceNow and those HCM developers have created several kind of like pre-built integrations. So they're just kind of turn it on, add some credentials, plug and play. And that's going to be available for most common well-adopted HCMs. So ServiceNow also has the capability to build out custom integrations, but that kind of falls down to the bottom of the list. There's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of those pre-built applications and integrations that's going to give us a lot of the data that we need.
Pre-built integration is definitely music to my ears, so it's nice to know that those are options for some of the major ones.
Yes, I know that both of you and I have built multiple Workday and or SAP SuccessFactors integrations, so being able to just turn it on makes our lives much easier.
Yeah. All right, so we are jumping into the HRSD maturity model. We are going to start with the crawl stage. Obviously, we've got a few different stages to any maturity model, but as always, we're starting with crawl, and this is going to be our starting point where the core features of HRSD are adopted. It's where we're beginning to take advantage of some of those key functionalities and really just getting familiar with how it works. This is where we are offering well-defined services and ensuring that employees can request those via the Employee Center or the mobile application. So employees are really getting familiar with the process now too. They're knowing where to go, they're knowing where to find stuff. So some of those key features are becoming just part of their normal work life. Case creation is triggered by those service requests that the employees create or that agents create on their behalf. And the cases are automatically routed to the correct team with defined fulfillment steps. This is where we are empowering managers with the resources and insights to support their teams using the Manager Hub, which we talked about earlier. So that's one of the initial things that we start using from the very beginning. Reporting is also used to provide visibility and monitor work and even drive process changes when needed because you've got that access to the data easily available to you. And there is a knowledge management system providing key information for both employees and for the HR team. So that's going to be access-based as well. So depending on what type of knowledge articles someone needs to see, those are going to be available to the correct people and hopefully, minimizing their workload. And then during this stage, processes are becoming streamlined and a foundation is built for future growth. So that's all part of the crawl stage. Ryan's going to take us through as we progress through this maturity model.
Thanks, Rebekah. So on the walk stage, we start to see kind of that expansion of services. So the foundational services that we did in the crawl stage were really important, but we're expanding out into specific services and centers of excellence like employee relations. ServiceNow, a couple of releases ago, released a fantastic scoped application that was specifically for employee relations. It is a really neat thing, but we can also expand out the services we're offering to our employees around maybe document management, or very much like Rebekah had mentioned earlier, that alumni portal. We're also looking to expand out our interaction with employees through virtual agent or ServiceNow's kind of chatbot. And we are looking at the second layer of the employee center. So we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, but there's an additional employee center portal that is available. But we're really then also focusing on our agents as well. So we're expanding that employee knowledge. So we're having things available both on the employee and the agent side. And then we're also standardizing our employees' responses, streamlining that a little bit with playbooks. So it's easy for agents to answer questions when there are pre-built responses, pre-built playbooks to help standardize how we respond back to fairly simple questions from employees. On the run phase, this is where HR takes off. We are starting to tackle some of the largest HR processes when we talk about onboarding, job change, offboarding, all of those kinds of things. Those are very large bites. They kind of have their own crawl, walk, run approach. But this is where HR is starting to tackle things and really going from being responsive to employees to being proactive with employees. So we're reaching out through a candidate portal. We're establishing journeys for our employees. We're connecting to LMS. Again, that learning management to guide and coach them. We're establishing listening posts so we can have a feedback loop from our employees. And we've got a good solid data and a good solid foundation to be able to start putting predictive intelligence in place to help us solve cases and to start using AI and machine learning to help with our case solve, but also with our employee interactions. So when we talk about crawl and walk, we're typically going to be within that HRSD professional license. But as we move into that walk and run, we're looking at sometimes more of the HRSD enterprise licensing. Okay, so let's take a look at quick wins. So when we're spending the time and capital on something like ServiceNow, that return on investment is critical. So we're wanting to make sure that we are seeing those quick wins, but we're also leveling up the services that HR is providing to the employees. So expectations have changed, I think, from employees over the last couple of years. So one of the things that is going to be a quick win with something like ServiceNow is laying that foundation for automation and self-service. So we've got that tier 0 support for HR self-service. We're offering robust knowledge for our employees and agents. And we're able to kick off simple automation through ServiceNow's virtual agent. So as simple as case status, navigating employees to knowledge articles, those kinds of things to be able to deflect any of those inbound cases. Other quick wins within ServiceNow is a lot of the out-of-the-box metrics for operational reporting and performance analytics. So we're also getting case visibility across the organization. And the little caveat there always is, if I have access. And now that we have those services established, we can start to put service level agreements in place and measure our commitment to the customer. So this is foundational for service quality. So we're really wanting to make sure that we're hitting service quality and managing that service quality.
Thanks, Brian. And another big one here is that modern employee experience. So a quick one here is that employees have that simple single point of contact via the employee center that we've been discussing. They have the ability to access that on their mobile device as well. And there's that dynamic content aspect of it also. So there's searchable knowledge articles and services, again, depending on access and roles. There's case tracking and interaction with HR. So employees can come in and keep track of where their case is. They can chat with HR, get statuses. There's manager access and visibility into cases. And that's going to really help support the work. And that gives the managers and leadership the ability to support the people who are doing the work and to make organizational decisions. There's also the automated emails that are triggered throughout the case lifecycle. So that really helps to keep communication up to speed. People always know what's going on with the case, what status it's in. And these notifications are branded and organization specific. So they're really easy to turn on, but also really easy just to brand and make specific to your organization. And the next one here is connect human capital management. And the key call out on this one is removing that swivel chair. And by this, we really just mean streamlining processes and reducing the places that users need to go to get their job done, the places that they need to go to find the information that they're looking for, and really increasing productivity as a result of that. And I think Ryan was discussing earlier that he had a good example of this one too, if you want to jump in on there, Ryan.
Yeah, thanks, Rebekah. So I worked with an HR company a couple of years ago, and when an employee called in, they had 5 pieces of data to verify their identity because they'd been hit with multiple phishing attempts. So they were kind of bumping that up, and an agent used to have 3 screens up. They would have kind of the soft phone for the call center, they would have their system of record, and then they would have their HCM in this example, and it was Workday. So they had to have 3 screens open, and they were moving between the 3 screens as they were asking the employee the challenge questions, checking the data to make sure things were right. So what we did after just kind of like looking at that interaction, we moved that data into ServiceNow and also moved the soft phone for the telephony piece into ServiceNow. So all the agents were in was ServiceNow afterwards. The screen pop would happen when an employee would call. They would already do some verification within the IVR tool. And then all of that employee data that was needed was read-only within ServiceNow. So the agents didn't have to open Workday. So it significantly sped up their verification process and allowed kind of that impacted like agent metrics, employee satisfaction, intake times. Like there's a lot of things that were impacted by that one kind of simplistic change.
Yeah, that makes it so much cleaner for everyone involved.
It absolutely does. Okay, so let's take a look at what the experience actually looks like for the employees.
All right, I think we are going to start here with the portal. So or the employee center. We're looking at the unified employee experience on this slide. So within this unified employee experience, we have got the ability for employees to engage with their organization using the Employee Center Pro, which is what we're going to be talking about here. It's a consumer-like self-service application that allows employees to do a number of things, including searching the knowledge base, chatting with HR. They can search for a service and open an HR case. They're able to even acknowledge an e-sign document. So if there are tasks assigned to them or they need to go and e-sign something, that's going to be available right here within Employee Center. So they can open that up, e-sign that document, and complete that task. They're able to update some of their own profile information here. And this is a portal for multi-department service delivery. We discussed this again, but just to highlight it again here in this slide, that they can take actions unrelated to HR, like opening an incident or ordering items from the service catalog. This also utilizes enterprise and AI-powered search, which Ryan will talk about a little bit more in the next couple slides, and then utilizing virtual chat box and live chat.
Right. Thanks, Rebekah. So very similarly, and in the same theme, one of the things that I absolutely love about something like the Employee Center is it doesn't matter where you are, right? Whether you're on a desktop, whether you're on a laptop, whether you're on a tablet or browsing it through your phone, it is native mobile capable. So there are embedded applications, which I'm going to talk about in just a second, but if you don't have the apps installed and you're able to authenticate, you can view the Employee Center portal on your phone very much the same way that you would at your desktop. I mean, obviously it's going to be shrunk down and a little bit more mobile capable, but all the same things are going to be available. There's no loss of features or functionality there. And we talked about virtual agent a little bit earlier, but we've got virtual agent natively embedded in that to be able to kind of help employees with their asks, pull back information, provide them additional detail. And ServiceNow also provides native iOS and Android apps. And what's amazing about that is it's all the same functions and features that you have within the desktop version. And there's an employee-facing app and an agent-facing app. And what's amazing about all of this being on a single platform is all of that is on the same application. So from the same native iOS app, I can open an incident because my computer's broke. I can tell facilities that I need to move my desk, or I can open a grievance against somebody. So I can look at all of the same knowledge. I can look at my case status. I can do my approvals. All the same features and functionalities are available wherever that employee is and with whatever device they're using.
All right, thanks, Ryan. We are about to wrap up, but we need to look at how to measure success. So we have looked at a lot of information so far, starting with the start where you are activity. We looked at how organizations manage HR processes and employee interactions today. We've gone through what HRSD looks like in ServiceNow and how to prepare for the migrations by assessing your services, your data sources, and other applications that are used. And we looked at some quick wins that can come out of that initial implementation. And then we just went through what the employee experience looks like. And so finally, after going through all that, we really want to talk about how we're going to measure success. So how are we going to know if this transformation was successful?
So that's a really good point, Rebekah. And that's something that I hit when I'm working in workshops with new clients is if we don't establish metrics and keep track of them, we have no idea if we were successful. And that's not an answer that somebody wants to give when they say, all right, I gave you all this money to implement ServiceNow. Was it successful? And the answer is like anecdotally, yes, but do I have the data to back that up to say yes, then yes, it was successful. Yes, here's the benefits to our organization. So one of the big, when we talk about measuring successes, with end-to-end processes within ServiceNow, we can really start to have that process optimization. So are we able to look at the KPIs for that process? Are we able to identify bottlenecks? Is it working like we wanted it to? And an outcome of that is, are we looking at better productivity? Are we freeing our agents up to be able to provide better service to those employees? Are we seeing more productivity because we're deflecting more cases? From a leadership perspective, and even from down to like a queue manager level perspective, do I have increased visibility? What does it look like, and how am I able to see what's happening within my organization?
Thanks, Brian. And then moving on to cost, that's another key area to evaluate. So are we saving people time? Are we saving them time in onboarding? Are new hires being productive sooner? How many clicks have we removed for our agents as they were going through their processes? And look at the caseload. Is caseload being reduced as a result of employees now having that easy access to the information that they're looking for? Then looking at employee satisfaction. Do employees feel empowered to do their best work? Do they have the confidence that the requests that they're submitted are going to be handled timely and accurately, and that they can communicate with HR as needed and just get the answers to the questions that they have? And then another one is employee retention. We want to look at how our turnover rate has decreased, and we're looking at both voluntary and involuntary turnover. The goal is for those numbers to be going down as employee satisfaction is going up, as employee productivity is going up. We're expecting that employee retention to be going up as well, and turnover to be going down. And then finally, reduce risk. Are we delivering a consistent, reliable experience and preventing any gaps? Is sensitive data appropriately protected? Is it only accessible to the correct user? And just making sure that those risks that have been identified are being mitigated.
Thanks, Rebekah. And I know that we are at just about at the top of the hour, but I saw there was a couple questions coming in. Lindsay, I don't know if we have time to sneak a question or two in.
Let's do it. Let's do two, I believe, in both of you. Let's see, I'll read off this first one to you in the order they came through. Are there instances where business lines within an organization would leverage these capabilities in lieu of central HR? Examples being onboarding, offboarding, promotions, leave of absence, etc.
That's a really good question, and that's kind of an interesting question. So I'll answer, and then I'll see if Rebekah's got any additional thoughts. I think the short answer to that is yes, and the longer answer is I would kind of want to understand that use case a little more. So those capabilities exist. One of the powers of the platform is kind of having all of that data centralized. I haven't really seen it within a specific line of business using ServiceNow. That being said, there's nothing preventing it. Rebekah, have you seen that in any of your projects?
No, I haven't seen it called out like that, but I would agree with your response there for sure.
Great. Thanks, guys. Okay, last one, and then we'll call it a day. As far as ticket management is concerned and reporting with workflow, didn't see this function listed during the session today. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, we can speak to that. That's one of those areas too that is kind of that case and knowledge that we talked about. We could probably do a whole separate session specifically on like the case management aspect and the knowledge management aspect, because that's kind of a much bigger umbrella. But the case and knowledge and all of those embedded metrics are one specific area that you can kind of dig into a little bit more. But we're probably I'd like to do another webinar on HR in the future. And that would be a really good topic to have on like how organizations fulfill those services based on their specific workflows. So I didn't 100% answer the question, but I think it did a little bit. I don't know, Rebekah, if you've got anything you want to add there.
Yeah, and like you said, there's a lot that you can dig into there, and it can be as simple as just having a template applied to certain types of requests, or like you said, there can be behind the scene flows or workflows that are driving the fulfillment throughout the process. So like Ryan said, it can be built out however the process has been defined by the organization. And then there always are metrics involved where you can report on any of that data as needed as well.
Great, thank you. We did have one more come through. Do you guys have time to tackle it? Let's do it. Like the answer is going to be no. Okay, so here we have, if one HR team is fulfilling multiple services, should they have multiple COEs or one COE with multiple topics?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna this is gonna be the consultant's answer of it depends, but it honestly depends. And I say it depends because for me, when I talk about which COE things fall under, it usually comes back to the question of security. When I determine like if we've got two COEs where they could be completely, or it could be like, is it total rewards? Is it benefits? That's always a question mark. But when it comes down to like who has access to that data, who's seeing those cases, that's kind of usually my deciding factor on where things should be within a COE, because it also comes down to like reporting as well. So I don't know that I don't usually have a hard and fast rule on if it should be a COE, which COE it should be in. It's usually a little more along the lines of like which COE, and like if you've got a service that's complex enough, that could potentially be broken into multiple services. So it kind of depends, and I feel a little bit bad giving that answer because it's not a hard and fast like yes no, but there are definitely some factors in there. And then Rebekah, I'm sure you have thoughts on that one too.
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely some flexibility there, and you called out groups who are going to be working on these cases. So one group could definitely still have access to services in more than one COE. So if they're aligned to a certain type of service that spreads out across different COEs, that can be built in, that's totally fine. I think the more hard line is when it comes to employee relations, because just out of box in ServiceNow, there's a lot more security and restrictions around employee relations related cases. So I think that's where you need to draw a little bit more of a hard line and separating out the types of services that are within that employee relations. But apart from that, I think there's a lot more flexibility that you can work with.
It's a good question. You could probably also lump payroll in there as well. Payroll's usually got a pretty hard and fast rule, but like I mentioned, total rewards and benefits usually are kind of a blurry line because it depends on how the organization defines those things. So it's also sometimes more of an organizational alignment. Like global travel sometimes can fall under benefits, sometimes it's total rewards, sometimes it's more general. It just kind of depends on the organization structure.
Great, thank you so much. Let's call it. Thank you to everybody who took the time to spend with us today. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Rebekah. Take advantage of our resources that you see on the slide here. We also have all of our past ServiceNow webinars are on our website, beyond20.com/webinars. We do have a whole webinar just on HR onboarding in ServiceNow. We have several HR webinars where we've tackled different topics in the past. So if you're interested in digging in further, there will be more to come, but we also have a library for you. So have a lovely day, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.